Welcome back to Work and our two-part Q&A series with Barry Asin, President of Staffing Industry Analysts. If you didn't hear us before, Barry's specialties at work include research, business strategy, competitive and industry analysis. He is also an expert in workforce trends and developments. So Barry, thanks for joining us back.
Happy to be back.
Great.
Thanks for having me again. I guess that's a good sign that you, I did okay last time.
I would think so. Yeah, we'll let our listeners decide. Maybe depends on if they stuck with us for part two. For those who may not have listened, on our first part of this Q&A series, we explored the gig economy, staffing trends, talked a little bit about AI and a few other topics. Barry, I want to talk about one thing that's come up a lot in media recently. I don't know if it's just because media consumption is higher, but it seems like unionization has really grown over the past few years. I don't know if that's something where, like I just said, it's just more pervasive. We're more aware of it than we have been, but it seems to me like there's been kind of an uprising in unionization efforts in non-traditional union industries specifically. What have you seen? What are some of the perspectives that you've heard from leadership in companies, but also from the employee side? Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What's kind of the consensus, or is there one?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a consensus right now. I think what we talked earlier about this idea that the power dynamic has changed between workers and employers. We're in this moment of very low unemployment. The number of open jobs every month there's like 11 million open jobs and only 4 million unemployed people. And so if you put if every one of those people had the right skills and you put them into one of those open jobs, we'd still be 6 million, 7 million jobs short. So, or 7 million people short. So the power dynamic has changed. And, I don't see that changing anytime soon. If you just think about all the sorts of drivers, the demographics, the population just that could be in the labor force has been slowing. Population growth has been slowing. Immigration has become this politically charged issue. So we're not growing the labor force, and we don't have a lot more people to sort of bring back into the labor force. And so it's not shocking that we're starting to see, all sorts of different evidence about this changing power dynamic. And the growth in unions, I think, is one example of that. I haven't seen a lot of data that indicates that there's been some big growth actually in unions. I think there's been some high profile things, what was it? Starbucks has had some of this. And so things that have made the news. We've seen more strike activity and things like that, particularly lately. Particularly we just sort of narrowly averted this rail workers strike, which would have been, potentially, there's so many things right now that I think, we're still trying to ungum the supply chain, and labor is a key element of that. But we're trying, there's just all these shortages that came from this shutdown of the economy. And so a lot of that's what's driving inflation. I think the power dynamic has changed. I think we're definitely going to see more sort of high-profile moves to unionization, I suppose. I don't know that the sort of long-term historic trend has been running away from unions in the United States, other than in the public sector, in government areas. So I'm not really. The sort of pros and cons, right? I think to the extent that employers have been not treating their workers very well, unionization is sort of or potential for that is a wake-up call. And that should be, leading employers to say, hey, we've got to find a better way to make sure that we've got people who are happy with what they're doing and getting paid fairly. And all of that. And so I'm not anticipating that it's going to become some huge overall trend. I do think it creates problems for flexibility in labor force. I mean, I spend a lot of my time studying workforce flexibility, and I think it just makes it a little bit harder for organizations to be as flexible as they want to be. But it does point out, right, that workers would like more certainty, and so employers who can offer that certainty to employees are likely to win the war for talent, more likely to win the war.
Yeah, I mean, the war is still ongoing, it seems, and employers are still struggling. People are leaving jobs they may have had for years. People talk about the Great Resignation, quote unquote, whatever you want to call that. Um, how can companies make their jobs and their company more attractive and improve their retention efforts? You mentioned flexibility is one thing you're focused on pretty highly. That has to be one aspect of it, but I'm sure it's a full calculation or equation that really brings people together and makes these jobs more attractive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a magic bullet that like just raise your pay rates, across the board raise pay. Um, but flexibility is definitely, I think more and more, particularly as we get to younger workers, they're valuing that more and more. The other thing I would say is that culture matters, and the way people are treated. People, if you treat people more like human beings and less like cogs in the wheel. I think none of us really want to do that, but sometimes people can feel treated that way. Um, and we've been really pleased over the years to celebrate in our area where we look at staffing and recruiting firms. We celebrate and recognize companies that have built a sort of great, best staffing firms to work for as the way we do that. And there are lots of different measures of great culture in organizations. But that is, that's a big part of companies' employment brand is, to be recognized. First off, the most important thing is to build a culture that is attractive for people. And typically, what is an attractive culture for people? Like they want to feel like they have a voice. They want to feel treated, respected. They want to feel like, more and more, particularly for younger people, they're very purpose driven. And so, like, what is your business doing? It can't just be about we're making a profit. And I mean that, which is actually great and important and all that, but they want to know that there's like something that you're doing that's making the world better, and how is your business like really sort of improving the world of work out there. And so I think that um, all of that sort of culture related things are just more important than ever. It's particularly important, right, when people have a choice. And I mean, study after study has shown that people will take less pay for good working conditions in a company that they believe in the mission, and some place where they're respected and listened to and and treated properly. And so I think that's a very important point. And so I mean I think that sort of gets at what you were looking for there, Joe.
No, for sure. I mean, you mentioned purpose driven. It seems like it's not just what you're doing as in your job or what the company's creating, but how they're doing it. So, in terms of what are your sustainability efforts? What are you doing to get back? All those sorts of things that may have been kind of nice to haves in the past are now necessary, especially to attract the younger workers. So, is it are you seeing sort of companies shift their mindset from not just, oh yeah, we're sustainable, we do some things with green or we do give back, but really promoting that in a much larger way than they ever have?
Yeah, I think I think the places where it works the best is where it's authentic. So I think people are smart, and they can sort of read the BS meter, where it's just sort of the lip service. So I think it's important that it's authentic, but yes, I mean obviously people care about the environment. We've been through this whole big social change, rightfully so, around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think now is, it's even to the point where it's not just like the right thing to do, but it's also in this moment of intense talent shortage. It's like you can't leave any community behind, or people that you might have overlooked in the past or not really reached out to, in terms of hiring. So I think it's more, to your point, or your question here. I think it is, those sorts of things are more important than ever. It can seem more complicated, I think, for the world, but it often comes back to the golden rule, right? It's like, how would you want to be treated in the organization you work? And generally, people will respond to that. And but I think there's a lot more to attracting talent right now. Certainly you've got to get the word out, and and depending on the demographic that you're looking for people, you've got to be in the right sort of places, and the old sort of just like post a job somewhere and people are going to flood in. That's not going to work so much anymore.
Right. Barry, I have two final questions, very related, as we close out this podcast here. So I'm going to go one after the other. In the next 5 years, what leaves you the most optimistic about the staffing space, about the talent economy, however you want to interpret that? What are you most optimistic about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm most optimistic about the innovation that's out there. We were just at we had a essentially week-long set of conferences with large enterprise people who are managing, particularly focused around contingent and gig workers, and staffing suppliers and the like. And so we were talking with all of them. The level of innovation is, it's off the charts, really. The level of investment and new approaches that I've seen to sort of particularly around technology, to help organizations attract, onboard, retain, train, all of that. There's tons of innovation. If you thought you knew what was going on 3 years ago or 5 years ago, like, you got to go back and look again. There's a lot changing out there. So I'm very optimistic that the innovation is good. And then I think the other great cause for optimism is just that sort of changing mindset, to that work doesn't need to be that sort of traditional job, and that there's a lot of different ways for both workers and employers to engage in getting work done. So I think that sort of innovation, the open-mindedness and the flexibility, the growth of that, I think that I think is really optimistic for the future of work.
And on the flip side there, maybe what concerns you the most or gives you pause about the talent economy over the next few years? And then
I mean,
maybe, what do you think needs to change in order to kind of avoid those concerns?
I guess one thing that I think that we're not going to go back to the way it was before. So it would give me pause if people just sort of think like, okay, when are we going to go back to normal? Like, I think, pandemics in particular have always changed society. You can look back on, like the bubonic plague of the 1300s, and that ended feudalism and led to the middle class and democracy, and the Spanish flu and led to the Roaring Twenties and a lot of the changes there. I don't think we're going back. So that has me worried. I think folks who are just like to, like, let's the world just continues to evolve. And I think maybe the biggest things are it's sort of like what's in your circle of control and what's out of your circle of control. We keep getting reminded that there's a lot of things in the world from that you just not any one person or any one company is going to have any control over. We look at the sort of state of politics. We look at the war in Ukraine and the sort of assault on democracy there. I think there's a lot of things in the world to worry about, and that can change and disrupt the workforce. In the very short term, we're in this moment with inflation and the attempts to control that, and so that's going to be, there's sort of these countervailing poles on the world of work. I'm in the end, I'm pretty optimistic about it. I think people are endlessly creative, but I think it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. It is uncharted territory right now. Like, we've never had a situation before where we've had like unemployment so low and then GDP sort of declining or flat, and and then inflation. It's a pretty crazy economy out there right now. So I think it will work its way through, but it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride here.
Well, Barry, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and providing your insights for this two-part series. If people want to get in touch with you, I'm sure everyone on this who's listening to this is familiar with SIA, but if they want to get in touch with you, how should they go about doing that?
If you know SIA, at staffingindustry.com. We've got all sorts of news and information on there. You can shoot me an email at basin@staffingindustry.com, and happy to point you in the right direction if I can.
Wonderful. Thank you also to our listeners for tuning in to Yo's Back to Work podcast. To hear past and future episodes, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen in. For Yo's Back to Work, I'm Joe McIntyre. Thanks for listening.